Welcome, everyone, to the conversation today. Glad to have you here. This is Ben Eubanks, President of NASHRM. We're going to wait one more minute to see if we can get a couple more attendees another moment to join us, and then we're going to get started. Okay, let's get this show on the road. So as I said, welcome everyone. My name is Ben Eubanks. I'm the president of NASHRM this year. We're hosting the webinar today in conjunction with our good friend Stephen over at College Recruiter, and I'm excited to hear from him about some of the trends in recruiting, and he has some really interesting insights to share with us. I want to make a few quick housekeeping announcements, and then we can get to our content. So on the right panel, you should have a chat box there. There's actually a link to pop that open. It says chat. You can interact with anybody during the session. You can send in questions for Stephen. If he says something thought-provoking, you can ask him. You can comment on how things are working for you. In our last session, that was one of the things that people really enjoyed, was being able to have that discussion, interact with other people, and hear from others in the audience, despite not being there live in person. Right? We can still chat and interact with each other and learn from each other, in addition to learning from what Stephen has to share with us. If that is a distraction for you, because some people prefer not to have that, you can close that chat down very easily. Don't have to worry about that. After the session is over today, the slides will be emailed out along with our normal survey and recertification credits. So just keep an eye out for those things. They'll come out after the session today once we're all said and done to all registrants. Now, without further ado, let's get to our speaker. Stephen Rothberg is the president and the founder of College Recruiter. He believes that every student and recent graduate deserves a great career. College Recruiter is a job search site that each year helps more than 2.5 million students and recent graduates find employment. And its customers are primarily Fortune 1000 companies, federal government agencies, and other organizations that want to hire dozens or even hundreds of students and recent grads of all 1-, 2-, and 4-year colleges and universities for part-time, seasonal, internship, and entry-level roles. So definitely an interesting set of work they're doing there. Stephen, we're glad to have you with us today.
All right, Ben, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. My contact information was on that opening slide. Feel free to reach out to me via Twitter, LinkedIn, email, or even there's a device now that people I've heard are using. I think it's called a phone. Definitely interrupt as we go along with questions. I'm going to have that general tab open on that right side. So as we're going, if there's something that I say or wish that I had said, if you wish that I said it, if you want clarification, agree, disagree, just feel free to chime in over there, and I will try my best to answer those as we go. Definitely some presenters like to hold questions till the end. I work quite well with interruptions. In today's presentation, I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the different generations that are currently in the workforce, just to help ensure that we're all on the same page about exactly what is Gen Z. I'm going to talk a little bit about the attributes, what kind of jobs they're looking for, what matters to them more than other things. And then I'm going to give a few examples of employers that I think are doing a really thoughtful, phenomenal job of reaching out to this generation that definitely has some differences from previous generations. So to ensure that we're all on the same page, baby boomers, which are really starting in a big way to exit the workforce now. And I say finally, not finally like good riddance, but finally because many of them would have preferred to retire 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But because of the Great Recession that started 10 years ago, many of them really were not able to retire because they lost so much money with their savings through their home equity, retirement funds, whatever. But the oldest of the baby boomers, by most definitions, were born in 1964, which puts them about a decade away from the traditional age of retirement. The oldest of the baby boomers were born right after the Second World War, and now People of that age, far more of them are actually dying per year than retiring per year. That's just how big or big of a spread that generation is. Gen X, that's me. Those born between 1965 and 1980. We are often called the forgotten generation because very many people will talk about different generations and they'll go right from boomers right over to Gen Y, or as most people prefer to call them, millennials. The baby boom generation was the largest workforce or segment of the workforce in history. They are also the largest number of people of any generation in history until the millennials came around. There are more millennials than boomers. There were, at the height of the number of boomers who were alive, there were still more millennials at the height of the number of millennials that were alive. So the millennials are the largest generation in US history, and they also now comprise the largest segment of the workforce. So if your organization is still struggling to figure out how to recruit, retain, manage millennials, then you've really got to get it together, because this should really be the majority, or at least a plurality of your workforce. And then coming along, almost unheard of, until very recently, is the youngest generation. These are the Gen Zs, the oldest of which were born in 2000, which makes, by most definitions, that puts them at 18 years of age, coming up on 19. So those that graduated from high school, did not go on to college, or they're in college, maybe looking for a part-time seasonal internship kind of a role. That's who we're talking about here. Gen Z, as you'll see a little bit later, in terms of numbers, they're far more similar to Gen X than to millennials or baby boomers. There just aren't that many Gen Zers. The Gen Zers stereotypically are the children of Gen Xers, and that goes a long way to explaining why there are so many fewer Gen Zers than Gen Yers. So the baby boomers, again, they were the largest generation in history until the millennials came along. People used to talk about how the world revolved around baby boomers, and to an extent it did. You know, they were the children of World War II veterans, Korean War veterans. They came into being into their sort of adult life largely in the 60s and 70s. And especially in the 60s and 70s in the US, it was for many people, a very prosperous time. America was very much on top of the world in terms of the economy. Some of that was due to the devastation in Europe and the Far East and Japan, et cetera. And so the country that emerged from World War II largely unscathed was the US. And we rode that prosperity through the 50s into the 60s and 70s. The 60s and 70s, of course, saw a tremendous amount of social upheaval, and the baby boomers largely were a part of that. They were there for a lot of the race riots, the sexual revolution, et cetera. And they also saw the oil crisis in the early 70s, the Cold War. They were around when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, et cetera. Millennials have no memory of that, and certainly not any Gen Zs. That to them might as well be US Civil War time. It's such ancient history. The stereotype about a baby boomer is that they live to work. It's not at all uncommon to find a baby boomer who strives for that corner office. They're putting in 50, 60 hours a week, week after week, rarely taking vacations. They feel a tremendous amount of pressure to succeed. Some of that is due to the size of their generation, that there were just so many of them. So there was so much more competition for the top positions. They value face-to-face communications. Many of these people went into the workforce before there was anything such as a cellular phone, and for many of them also, they went into the workforce before they were even fax machines. So in order to have a meeting with someone or get a document to someone, you had to mail it or walk it over to them or have it overnighted or something along those lines. And so inevitably, there were a lot more lunch meetings and there were a lot more meetings in the office than there are now. They tend to be very loyal. They're seeking lifetime employment. They want to move up the corporate ladder. Their vision of how to succeed and how to get into that position and get compensation that they feel that they deserve is to stay with the same organization and move up the corporate ladder. That has really changed from generation to generation. Gen Xers, my generation, far smaller. We're about half the number of Gen Xers as there were baby boomers and also the generation following us. The stereotype of us is that we work to live. Yes, we're going to work hard, we're going to put in long hours, but the purpose of that is to pay enough so that we can live in that house that we want to live, go on the vacations that we want to go on. We can debate why it is, but Gen Xers stereotypically tend to value work that's more independent. You see more solo entrepreneurs in the Gen X group than you do in either of the two generations that surround us. And does that make us more resilient and more adaptable, or more independent because we're more resilient and more adaptable? Probably another conversation for another day, because today we're focusing on the Zers. And we also question authority. It is not uncommon for a Gen Xer in a workplace to talk back to their boss in a way and at a time that a baby boomer would just absolutely not. I think that that's because there are fewer Gen Xers, and so we feel that we have more power in the workplace at a similar stage in our career than a baby boomer would have. It's harder for a company to replace all their Gen Xers than it is to replace all their baby boomers or all their millennials. So if they don't like us, oh well. Millennials, as I was saying earlier, largest generation in history, both in terms of the total population as well in terms of the workforce participation. So this is the group that should be forming at least the plurality and perhaps the majority of your workforce. The oldest of the millennials are now in their late 30s. So a lot of HR people that I talk with that are sort of struggling to figure out millennials are still thinking of millennials as college students or recent graduates. But many of these people graduated from college 15 years ago. They have homes, they have 2 or 3 kids, they're on to their second dog. Some of them are even getting close to having grandchildren. If they got married young, and if their kids got married young or at least had kids young, then the oldest of these people are about to become grandparents, and clearly they're going to be a small number that are. So I would urge you, when you're thinking about millennials, not to be thinking about the 21, 22, 23-year-old and at the point in their career that somebody of that age would be. Instead, I would be thinking about somebody who has now been in the workforce for far longer than they were in college. They've been in the workforce for 8, 10, 12 years, maybe more for some of them, where typically you're going to be in college for only 2 to 4 years. So the workforce has shaped them far more than what shaped what they happen in college. It's the first generation that really grew up with digital devices, computers. So as a Gen Xer, when I was a kid, a small number of people had home computers. The first real widespread home computer was 1982. So the millennials all grew up with that. Very few Gen Xers did, and none of the baby boomers did. They tend to value collaboration. If any of you have been into a school in the last 20 years, you'll see that the way that especially primary education is taught, and also secondary, far more group classes. Whether that's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, I think on balance, it's a good thing. They definitely value being in a collaborative environment where they're surrounded by bright people. They don't want to be held back, and they don't want to be put into a group of people simply because it's a group. that group should be able to be like a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of environment. That's what they're looking for. And then the work to live is similar to that of Gen Xers, but their expectations about the money that they need to live is quite different, because they came of age during 9/11, they came of age during the Great Recession, and they just don't feel loyalty to their employers because their employers didn't feel loyalty to them. If you were an older millennial and working and doing a great job, and 2008, 2009 rolled around and your company let go of 2/3 of their recruiters and one of those people was you, be pretty hard for you to then say that you need to be loyal to a company for the rest of your life. It becomes more of a transactional relationship, very different from boomers. Gen Z, within about a year and a half, they're going to be the 20%, I should say, of the workforce will be Gen Zers in about a year, starting in about a year and a half. So this is a significant amount of the workforce, and depending upon what your company does, they could even be half of your workforce. If you have a large number of hourly employees that are 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age, then you're going to have a significant and perhaps even a majority of your workers are going to be these Gen Zers that we're talking about. This is the first generation that's truly digital. Most millennials grew up with devices and felt comfortable, but they weren't, for many of them, born into it. Cell phones really became popular in the mid-90s. And so many of the millennials are older than that. Many millennials will remember a time when their computers or their parents' computers were on dial-up, not broadband. Many of them will remember the first cell phone in their family, or that all of the kids shared a cell phone. And for Gen Z, again, it might as well be out of the history books. You're talking Abraham Lincoln and people getting cell phones, and they don't really feel like one is modern and one is not. This generation, it kind of makes me sad, but this generation has grown up in a time when the US has always been at war. The oldest of them were born in 2000. They're not going to have memories from when they were 1 or 2 years of age. Their first memories, our first memories for most people, are when they're 3 or 4. So that was already a year or two after 9/11. We were already fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan by the time this generation has their earliest memories. They've known only economic strife. Coming out of 9/11, there were lots of layoffs and turmoil, a lot of globalization, businesses doing a lot of outsourcing. You don't hear about that much anymore, but there's a very good chance that Gen Z's parents were impacted by that. And as a result, this generation approaches work quite differently. I mean, talking about millennials not having much loyalty, Gen Z has even less. They tend to be very active in how they learn and communicate, even though baby boomers might not pick up on that. I've been in meetings where there'll be 1 or 2 baby boomers and half a dozen Gen Zers, and the Gen Zers are sitting around the table and they're on their laptops and their phones, and they're typing away, and the baby boomers are getting frustrated because the Gen Zers aren't paying attention. And in fact, they're multitasking, they're texting with each other because in their mind, they're being kind or considerate to the group by not interrupting the baby boomer who's speaking, but instead they're sharing insights with their fellow Gen Zers. Hey, let's not forget to do this because, my boss, Cindy, just said that we should be doing that. And that's something that just does not really get picked up too much by a lot of the older generation. So do not assume that if that Gen Z in your meeting is texting away, that they're texting with friends outside the workplace. They could be looking something up on Wikipedia to better understand a term that you just used so that they can be more effective within just a couple minutes in that meeting. One of the interesting things that's not really talked about in this Gen Z group is that they have a far lower drug, alcohol, tobacco, and pregnancy, let's call it usage, than previous generations. And that includes baby boomers. Far more baby boomers used drugs, used alcohol, used tobacco, and got pregnant at a young age. And same with Gen Xers and same with millennials. So people talk about Gen Zers as being immature. Let's be realistic. It's age-appropriate behavior in a lot of cases. You know, if you're 16 years old, you should not be held to the same standards as a 26-year-old, 36-year-old, 46-year-old, etc. They also tend to be minimalists. I have 3 kids, the oldest of which is 24, and so kind of a very young millennial. The youngest of which is 19. And so she's essentially a Gen Zer. She's kind of right on that borderline, and depending upon your definition, she might be a Gen Zer, I should say. And all of my kids are this way, and it's not just an anecdotal thing. There's just a lot of empirical evidence to indicate that Gen Zers value experiences a lot more than they value things. Now, why is that? I think it's because they don't have the money that previous generations did. If you think back to the 08, 09 recession, McDonald's had some of its best years ever. And it wasn't that people who didn't used to eat out were now all of a sudden eating at McDonald's. What was happening is that people who used to eat out at, say, like an Applebee's or a Chili's, like a fast casual kind of a restaurant, those people didn't have as much money, and so they were trading down to McDonald's. You also saw Starbucks and other coffee shops doing a much bigger business. So if people wanted a treat once a week to sort of do something for themselves that would make them feel good, that required them to spend money, it's much easier for them to go out and buy a $4 fancy cup of coffee than a $60 steak dinner. So during recessionary periods, or when people are having economic difficulties, a lot of times what you see is them switching from spending money or a lot of money on stuff over to spending a lot less money on things that are experiential. And they're very career focused. Again, this is a generation that has come into the world with a lot of economic strife. Many of them know that they cannot rely upon their parents to pay for college or to subsidize them after they get out of college, and they know that they're going to have to make money for themselves. I see that Vicky's asked a question. How do you know that the Gen Z is truly doing something work-related? We have a double standard here. We teach communication skills of giving eye contact to communicate that are listening. Are we not making up excuses for this behavior? I raised 4 and taught this skill. Absolutely, at times it is inappropriate behavior. It is inconsiderate behavior. If they're in a meeting and they're texting with friends, that's not cool. I think one way of finding out is to simply ask. We have weekly management meetings. We had one yesterday, and our youngest manager early in the meeting was on her phone, and I couldn't tell, was she texting with one of her kids? Was she looking up, something that was completely personal? Was she watching a video of cute kittens or whatever? And no, what she was doing was logging into a management screen and having a look at a dashboard to pull a report that we were at that moment discussing, but none of us had recollection over what exactly the numbers were. So I kind of like, hey, is this work related? And she said, yeah, this is the report that I'm pulling. It's like, cool, way to go. As that happens more and more with certain people, and you find out that certain people in your meetings are actually doing work when they're on their phones, I think everybody in the meeting will understand that. And of course, there are going to be other people that are just on Facebook and just wasting time. And those are the people that I think you probably have a one-on-one chat with after the meeting. They're savvy. The way that they think of the internet is not the way that a Gen Xer or certainly a baby boomer thinks of the internet. When a Gen Xer thinks of the internet, we think of a place that we go, that we're going to a website. Gen Zers have always been surrounded by the internet. It's a weird concept to them that you used to have to go someplace in order to access the internet, because they have the internet on their phone and therefore in their pocket 24/7. They're always on the internet. So the internet is like air to them, not in the sense that they need it to survive. We can joke about that, but it's there. You don't think about the fact that when you walk into a room, there's air. They don't think about the fact that when they walk into the room, there's internet. I do. I think about, do I have my laptop? Am I going to have a cell phone signal here? If I don't have a cell phone signal, can I get Wi-Fi? I sort of wonder, am I going to have it? To its stereotypical Gen Zer, they assume they're going to have it. And then when they don't, they're surprised. They're by far the most diverse group in history. I won't be surprised if 30, 40 years from now, we stop talking about races. There really is scientifically no such thing as a race. We're all on a spectrum. And Gen Zers, there's far more, some people talk about it in terms of mixed race. I hate that phrase, but there are far more that are born to, a father who might identify as African American and a mother who might identify as Asian American than in previous generations. Probably the first person who really made that famous was Tiger Woods. He's old to a Gen Zer. He's pushing 40. And so he's twice the age of most of the Gen Zers. To a Gen Xer, to a millennial, Barack Obama being, quote unquote, half black, half white, that was really unusual. To a Gen Zer, it's like, yes, so. They very much want to have a positive impact on the world. Again, experiences matter. Far more Gen Zers are volunteering. Far more of them want to work for a company that does good. So it's very difficult, for example, for insurance companies to recruit Gen Zers to be salespeople, because those Gen Zers do not perceive the work that insurance companies are doing as being good for the world. I think insurance companies do good for the world, but I think that the vast majority of them are really bad at telling that story in their employment marketing efforts. Friends and peers matter greatly, and they're very connected to them through Snapchat, etc. Facebook and some of the other social media platforms that us older people use, like a LinkedIn, are just kind of bewildering to a lot of Gen Zers. It's like, why would I want to be there? And they want immediacy, they want choices, they want to be able to choose between multiple options and to be able to do that right away. And think about that in the workforce. If you plug them into a role that they're going to be in that role for the next 5 years, that's going to be a real turnoff to them. But if you rotate them through different roles, like in an internship or in their first 2 years after graduation, you're going to spend 3 months in this area, 3 months in that area, 3 months in that area. That's going to be very appealing to them. Josh has a couple questions. That he looks like he's a Gen Y-er, uses his phone at work, puts it away during meetings. His company doesn't hire many Gen Y-ers. Sorry, Josh, you're on your own. And they don't have any Gen Zs. But he's actually found more Gen Xers get on their phones during meetings, mid-conversations. Rude, in my opinion. Absolutely, Josh, it can be, depending upon how they're being used. He said his wife's 60-year-old father does not look away from his phone during family outings, that's pretty funny. I would be kind of more like your 60-year-old father-in-law, where I'm on my phone more in family outings than my kids are. That's bad on me, that's good on them. Lindsay says that she's trying to leverage the technology skills to find ways of making the organization more efficient and help them feel appreciated by challenging them to come up with an app or software solution to a problem, then teach the other employees. That's great. Yeah, I mean, if you can kind of engage that young generation and give them that responsibility early on, that's great. It really makes them feel part of the process and gives them that sense that the work that they're doing is not just the grunt work and not just the work that other people, refuse to do or don't want to do. So One of the things that we talk about with this youngest generation, with Gen Zers, is that, you know, stereotypically they're always online, and because they have their phones in their pockets and data is free for most plans, they quite literally are always online. But I find it interesting that studies, including this one by J. Walter Thompson Intelligence, it's the parent company of JWT Inside, the employment ad agency, 79% of Gen Z feel that they spend too much time online. So although they're online a lot, they feel like they spend too much time online. And that might go to Josh's family situation, where the younger people are the ones who are less likely to be on their phones in a family gathering than at least one of the older members. 71% have active Facebook accounts. That does not include the ones that have inactivated their accounts. But 82% of the ones with active Facebook accounts are really careful about what they share. So just because you have a Facebook account, like my 19-year-old daughter does not mean that you're actually sharing a lot of stuff like I do. I won't think anything of it but to, you know, take a photo of our new dog or something that I ate or whatever. I'm a very stereotypical Facebook user, overuser. Our 19-year-old looks at Facebook, and she kind of scrolls through it, and she consumes the media. She doesn't create it. So she's reading other people's status updates, but she's rarely posts anything about herself or her friends. The vast majority, 68%, are very comfortable buying online, but that doesn't mean that they prefer to buy online. It's kind of like those surveys of gig economy, like how many people are participating in the gig economy, you know, how many people are Uber drivers and whatever, and you see that 25% of the US workforce are gig employees. That doesn't mean that they want to be. It just means that they do. So 67% of Gen Zers prefer to shop in person in stores. And so for those of you who work for Walmart, for example, that's really good news. Yet they definitely value their technology slightly more than half if they had to choose between giving up their sense of smell or for the rest of their lives, or giving up their phone for the rest of their lives. 51% would give up their sense of smell, which I find to be astounding. Ben says 79% of Gen Z feels they spend too much time online. Maybe that is an opportunity for those that are too digital to help them back off tech a bit.
Amy had said earlier that she said one of the downsides of Gen Z is that they are, quote unquote, a little too digital. And I wondered if that was an angle there. Like maybe they don't want to be, but they somehow feel like they're pulled into it. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that there's sort of the default is that the older generations, especially Gen Xers and Millennials, we've been pushing for everything to be digital. We've been pushing to have an Amazon app where we can go and order, you know, a container of spice that'll be delivered to our door tomorrow. And maybe we've been assuming that because Gen Z exhibits the same behavior, that they will also jump onto an Amazon app to order something, that's their preference. But it might just be that we've constructed a world in which that's become much easier for them. And in fact, I think that you know, based upon the actual data, it seems that they would really prefer to go into a shop to buy that bottle of spice. So I think that's something to keep in mind for companies. If you're kind of in an office environment and you have employees in multiple locations, if you're going to have video conferences, you might be assuming that your Gen Zers would prefer to be at their desk, you know, on a Skype, a Zoom, or some kind of an environment, where in fact they might really value being in person. So brand really matters. If you're going to be selling something to Gen Zers, they're going to look at that brand, not just of the actual product, but the store itself. If they have a favorable view of Walmart, they're going to be much more likely to shop at Walmart than previous generations. The brand is going to influence their decision whether to shop there or not. If they have a favorable view of Poshmark, they're going to be much more likely to buy and sell clothing on that website than some other website. They also think it's really, really not cool if they really disdain about a third of them if they're forced to use old devices. So if you get them into the workforce and you say, congratulations, you know, here's your computer, get used to Internet Explorer 8, you're going to have some high turnover. 83%, and then this goes to the Gen Zers who grew up in a time of economic strife. 83% want to save. A lot of studies that I see will just basically stop there. Oh, it's a generation that really saves. No, they want to save. There's a difference between wanting to do something and actually doing something. They want to save, but the vast majority of them are worried that they're going to be unable to save. And what are they going to do later in life when they run into financial troubles, when they have kids, want to buy a house, want to be able to retire, get hit with big medical bills? We've kind of cut that meat so close to the bone for most people in the middle class and lower income classes that there's a far greater percentage of people today with real concerns about their income and expenses. Far more people are one paycheck away from being evicted than there were 20 years ago. This generation strikes me as being very, very similar to the generation that, well, most people called them the GI generation. You know, today is the memorial service for George H.W. Bush. He came from this generation of which I speak, the GI generation. They were known for being very civic oriented. He went to a recruiting station, I think on December 7th, so when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. His first thought, apparently, and I hadn't heard this until a day or two ago, he was going to go up to Canada to volunteer for the Royal Canadian Air Force because they were accepting 17-year-olds, and he was 17 on December 7th. He ended up waiting until his 18th birthday and then signed up, I think, on his birthday or maybe within just a couple of days after that for what became the US Air Force. Gen Z is quite similar to that. The military recruiters that I speak of say it's far easier for them to talk with Gen Zer than a millennial, and far easier for them to convert that lead into a recruit than millennials. Now, maybe part of that is a lot of the millennials came of age during the height of the combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so for them it was more real that they would be going overseas and potentially coming back very, very seriously wounded or perhaps even dead. And for Gen Zer, there just aren't very many in that generation that have experienced that yet, and so that might be part of the military. But you know, getting them to volunteer, getting them to participate in nonprofits, doing government work, etc., far more than millennials and Gen Xers. They socially far more progressive than previous generations. Just as I was talking earlier about, you know, racial diversity and how they wouldn't look at Barack Obama, you know, or Tiger Woods as being anything unusual, like what's the big deal kind of thing. It's the same thing with them for social issues like same-sex marriage. The vast majority of them, even those who identify as being conservative, the vast majority of them support same-sex marriage. To them, it's kind of a done issue. Politically, I don't think it is, but for this youngest generation, they've kind of grown up in a time where we as a country were rapidly moving towards same-sex marriage, first in the courts, then legislatively. And they've kind of, in their adult life or in their teenage life, they really know nothing else. To them, it's just kind of inevitable. Compensation for them, depending upon your corporate mission, is something that there's flexibility about. Yes, they're worried about money, but they would be willing to trade off money for an organization that really lines up, or if their actual job within that organization really lines up with their value system. So you see a huge interest in this younger generation going into careers which are paid less, but allow them to give back more to society. So if you've got an organization that, you know, you're manufacturing widgets, you may have an opportunity there to really step back and tell the story about what a difference your widget does in your life. If you want a great example of that, boy, it's probably 10 years old now. Whirlpool did a recruitment video starring Reba McEntire, where the entire video, 2 minutes or so, was around the theme of a key and what the importance of a key was in a person's life. And basically the video was how Whirlpool provides a washer and dryer to every new Habitat for Humanity built house. So if you come to work for Whirlpool, you are helping people who are moving into homes that they had to pay with sweat equity rather than cash to buy those homes. It's a powerful video. I just got the chills just thinking about it. Plus, I'm a huge Reba McEntire fan. But if you haven't seen it, and if you work for a company that's somewhat like Whirlpool, you've got to find that video. And if you can't, you know, shoot me an email, whatever, and I'll get a link for you. This generation, the duration at which they're willing to look at content is getting shorter and shorter. I used to chuckle when I saw that the average attention span is 12 seconds. Now it's 8 for this generation. If you can't make your point known in 8 seconds, they're already thinking about something else. What does that mean? It means that it's going to be pretty hard for you to get a Gen Zer to go to your 20-page career center that unfortunately you probably paid millions of dollars for and read all these different pages on your diversity hiring and military hiring and what it's like to work in your office and all your benefits. And you know, if they have to spend an hour reading through all of that to have a really good idea of what you offer, that's too much. You're going to need to distill that down to 8 seconds and then provide them with those choices where they can immediately access other information. So give them a link to a 20-second YouTube video about your phenomenal medical insurance plan, or post something on Instagram, an infographic or something that tells them about what a fantastic community you live in with, you know, great outdoor opportunities, or whatever sells for your organization. They value graphics and videos more than they value text. I like to say that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video is worth 1,000 pictures. You can communicate far more in a 20-second video than you can in text that takes somebody 20 seconds to read. So think about that the next time you're trying to communicate some of your brand or value proposition to them. YouTube is far more popular amongst Gen Zers than it is amongst older generations. It's kind of become their TV. Also Facebook live streaming is something that's very popular. If you're having an event or you want to communicate kind of, hey, this is what it's like to be an intern here, use Facebook live stream. Just, you know, jump on your phone or have one of your coworkers jump on your phone and just stream it. You'll be amazed at how much that is consumed, and you're not going to have to start paying a videographer thousands of dollars for it. That raw footage, quick in, quick out, is something that they really like. And then that's the kind of content that when they are on Facebook, like my 19-year-old daughter, they'll watch that. They might not comment to it. They might not want to post their own videos, but they'll watch it. And then if it's really good, then that is the kind of thing that they will choose to share with friends. But they're not going to share it just because you ask them to. They're going to share it because it's really good. So that bar is fairly high. Diversity is natural to them. We were talking earlier about Obama and Woods. They don't look at race. They don't look at gender as binary. For them, they don't, stereotypically, a Gen Zer does not think of gender as being either male or female. They recognize that the vast majority of people self-identify as being male or female, but that there's actually a large group that is somewhat in the middle, LBGTQ. And that's something that I feel has always been there. I think as a society, we've become more willing to talk about it. And in some cases, we've become more willing to accommodate that. Clearly, there's a big political debate about how far that goes, et cetera. But understand that when you're talking about Gen Z, their attitudes towards that are going to be far different than baby boomers will be. And so if you're struggling to recruit Gen Z and you're forcing on them the values consistent with baby boomers, that might be part of the problem. If you're unwilling to bend on those values, then I would say that you just have to understand that you're making a business decision to make it more difficult and therefore more expensive to recruit and retain Gen Z. And that might be okay with you, depends upon the organization. HBCUs, the historically black colleges and universities, the Hispanic colleges and universities, they are in some ways falling out of favor. And I think that this is going to be an issue that we're going to have to grapple. Particularly, there are far more HBCUs, for example, in the South, in a state like Alabama than where I'm at in Minnesota. There's just a much larger African American population in Alabama than there is in Minnesota. But there's definitely a difference in attitudes amongst Gen Zers about these schools. A lot of them see these as relics of a bygone era and question why they would want to go to a school that is predominantly targeted at, say, African Americans, when they don't even self-identify as African American. Again, there's that non-binary viewpoint. So organizations that are primarily targeting HBCUs and HACUs for their racial diversity hiring are probably going to need to rethink that strategy. Yes, they're great places to recruit those students, but I think that those organizations are going to have to realize that they're not the only places to recruit those students, and maybe not the primary, maybe not even the primary places. There are far more African Americans who do not attend HBCUs than who do attend HBCUs. Size of organization, I found this to be very, very interesting. We were all talking as an industry about how hard it is for large organizations to hire millennials, that they all want to go to the startups. Back when Facebook was a startup, a lot of people talked about them that way. Twitter, the same sort of thing. There are, millions of startups in the country with 1 or 2 or 3 employees, and it used to be that large organizations were really pulling out their hair about how are they going to compete with these startups. That's not an issue with Gen Z. Only 14% actually want to go and work for a startup or a small company. This is according to a study done by Robert Half. I think this goes to economic insecurity issues. They know that if they go to work for a startup, that it is very likely that they're going to get paid in equity, and that equity is going to be worth nothing, or that they're going to work their butts off and do great work and do things that are really exciting, and then 3 months later be laid off because the venture money has run out. That does not tend to happen with the Whirlpools of the world. That does not tend to happen with the Tysons and the Walmarts and the Ernst & Youngs of the world. You do get people laid off. You do get whole departments being closed. You do get divisions being spun off, et cetera. But employment in a large organization is far more stable than in a small or startup organization. Work environment. For those of you in Cube land, do not think of collaborative work environments, the desire for a collaborative work environment translates into everybody wanting to be in an open office space. Boomers didn't like cubes, millennials didn't like cubes, Xers didn't like cubes, and neither do Gen Zers. The only people who like cubes are the CPAs. Let's be real about it. They're cheaper, and that's why so many companies do them. Just like every other generation, Gen Zers want a place where they can close the door and have quiet, and so they can focus, and so they don't have to smell the fried fish that you put into the microwave for lunch. And you know who you are who did that. Face-to-face communications, again, we touched on this a little bit earlier. This is an aspect that Gen Z values more than some of the older generations. So to the extent that you can, if you have a Gen Zer that is reporting to you, walk down the hall and talk to her. Don't just shoot her an email. That will help a lot. They also feel that the older generations are poor communicators. So there was a comment earlier about how some of the older generations feel like the Gen Zers, texting and whatever in meetings, that creates a poor communication environment. Interestingly, they feel the same in reverse, that they feel that baby boomers, half of Gen Zers almost believe that baby boomers are poor at communicating. That declines with different age groups. And I think it's because simply an age thing. If you're 18 and you're talking to somebody who's 60, it's going to be more difficult for you to communicate because the point in life you're at is so different than if you're talking to somebody who's 50 or somebody who's 30. You just have more in common. So Lindsay asked a question, would you say that's better work-life balance or worse, since the lines are
my comment got merged with Lindsay's. Lindsay said that collaborative today means that everybody's texting and Snapchatting to share everything, even after work and weekends. And I asked her, what does that mean for work-life balance? Does that mean it's better because, hey, I can do where I want to, or is it worse because there's the lines are so blurred? I'm curious.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think that there's very little work-life differentiation anymore. It's the rare professional position where you punch out and you're done for the day. It's really, really hard. If most of us on this call think about it, with phones, very few of us literally will not look at work email in the evenings or weekends. There is a movement internationally to prohibit that or to require employers to pay for that. I think that France has legislation to that effect. For example, again, we can debate the merits of that, but it is what it is. I think that the sharing on Snapchat, Instagram, whatever, it is something that all employees, just sort of as an aside, need to be educated about. What is appropriate to share, what is inappropriate to share. I've heard too many stories of young employees who have had their employment terminated because they shared information that their employer deemed to be confidential. And they shared that on Twitter or Facebook. Back in the day where you had to pick up a paper file, and walk over to a photocopy machine and photocopy those sheets and mail them out or overnight them out or fax them out, you had a while to think about it. Now, to just jump on Facebook and post something about how your employer just lost a big client or won a big client or whatever, it's really easy, and it allows us to act based upon our impulses. Sometimes those impulses are good and sometimes they're bad. Let's see. So Lindsay's saying she thinks it's both good and bad. I agree. Blends the lines between work and personal, turning coworkers into friends. That's absolutely true. You definitely see in all generations a lot of people after work, hey, you want to go get a drink? I think generally that's a good thing. You can ask to text after hours because there's so much personal sharing during work. I think many won't stop. I totally agree. Managing employee burnout looks like something completely different than it used to. Yeah, if somebody's in your office and they're working 8 or 9 hours and then they don't answer your email at 8:30 at night, is that dereliction of duty? I think most people would say no. But what if they worked 7 hours, then went home and then worked another 3 hours at home? Are your expectations different? Probably. What's work? What's not? If they're salaried, if they're exempt employees, I think the expectation there is quite different than if they're non-exempt employees also. The Gen Z sees some pessimism ahead of them, or they're pessimistic about what's ahead of them, I should say. The vast majority of them believe that they're going to have to work harder than previous generations. Again, I think this goes to the economic insecurity. Almost none of them think that they'll graduate, whether it's from high school or college or whatever, and work for one organization for the rest of their lives. If you go back to some of the oldest baby boomers and ask them that same question, I bet you most of them would have said that they'd work for one or two organizations for the rest of their life. And certainly Bush 41, H.W. Bush's generation, that absolutely would have been their expectation. You go, you work, you move up the corporate ladder, you retire with a gold watch, and a pension, not a 401k. Gen Z, you know, they'd love to retire at the age of 60, as many of us would, but only about, what, 1 in 5 of them expect to be able to do that for economic reasons. Far fewer Gen Zers expect or want to be an entrepreneur as compared to millennials. They are not that interested in working their way up the corporate ladder as baby boomers. So to entice a Gen Zer and say, work really hard now, someday you'll be a vice president, they're like, no, that's really not what I want. What I'd really like is if I worked really hard, you paid me more, which would then allow me to go to Tibet like I've always wanted to do. So you can keep your corner office. I'd rather have a week in Tibet. Only about a third of them want to be management. They're far more content to come to work hard, be done, and then get those experiences outside the workplace than within. If you're wondering, or if you feel like your organization cannot be all things to all people, welcome to the club. No organization can. Ranked in order of what their search priorities or job priorities are is this slide. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I did find it to be kind of interesting that of these 7, healthcare benefits are down at the bottom. We might think that therefore means that we should not be investing in, say, medical plans, and that we should be looking for ways of reducing hours to get them to 29 hours, and so we don't have to offer them medical. I think that what you're going to find is that as these 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds transition off of their parents' medical plans and onto their own, by and large, when they're in their mid-20s, that's going to suddenly become real to them, and you're going to see an increased value from this generation on healthcare benefits. Right now, they get it for free. They've always had it. It's really just not much of an issue for them personally at this young age. So I don't look at this as a generational thing. I look at this as an age-appropriate thing. Now, I promised that we're going to talk about a few employers, and these are them. Ernst & Young in the UK. There's an article in The Guardian from roughly 2 years ago. Look it up, it's fascinating. They did a study based upon their highest performing employees and found that there was a lack of correlation between the school and even the major that they had versus their most productive employees. I think that EY would probably say, I think it's fair to say that they would think that that they can teach somebody how to read a balance sheet, but they cannot teach them critical thinking skills. Goldman Sachs is no longer targeting specific schools for its undergraduate hiring programs. Now, regardless of what school you go to, they want to talk to you because they found, again, undergraduate schools, that there was, I think they found a very, very low correlation between the perceived quality of the school and the productivity of their employee. Lockheed Martin, one of their university recruiters was a panelist on a panel that I moderated a couple of years ago at a Talent Blend conference in suburban DC, and he said that the cost of them hiring somebody through an internet site like a college recruiter is about 1/10 of what it costs them to hire a similar person through on-campus recruiting because they don't have the staff and travel costs. And those quote-unquote virtual employees, those that they hired online, are far more productive than those that they hire on campus because the ones that are hired virtually tend to stay with the organization for far longer. They're there for, say, my words, not his, 5 years instead of 2. Amazon is school agnostic. They don't care what school you went to, because they see just a poor relationship between, or no relationship between, the quality of your work and the school. That goes not just for the hourly warehouse workers, but also for head office people. And USAA, the insurance company, same thing. They just don't see that correlation between school. These are some of the things that you should be looking at as far as the goals for this generation and tools. So look in your organization, your hiring practice, for things that are to be more inclusive, to broaden your hiring net rather than keeping it to 6 schools. Also be conscious of unconscious bias. We've probably all seen the stories of Amazon's AI program that they were testing, not using. And to Amazon's credit, when they discovered that it had unconscious bias against women, they killed it. So they didn't actually implement it, and good for them that they sort of raised that red flag in a way that we could all learn from it. Look for people that are high performers rather than just the cheapest hires, the effective cost per hire. We at College Recruiter would prefer somebody to be a scrapper, somebody who hasn't always had things handed to them, that they've had to overcome adversity. Assessments and gamification can lead you to that. Asynchronous video interviews where you record a series of questions and then candidates respond to them are loathed by most candidates. And you'll see a huge drop-off rate. I favor bisynchronous, where you actually have a back and forth conversation in real time. And AI, which we have a conference on Monday at Google's headquarters, the College Recruiting Bootcamp. AI is probably going to mean fewer recruiters in the workforce, but they're probably going to be able to do higher end work and be able to do it better. So I apologize for running a minute over. Any questions? Happy to stick around.
I think we hit the questions as they were coming in. Lots of good comments and discussion today. I don't know about everybody else, but I enjoyed hearing the conversation, hearing some of the insights and things about, goodness, what's going on, right? As we're getting ready for the next year and trying to plan ahead and think through what's coming. I think some really, really great insights today, Stephen. So I appreciate you sharing with us.
Awesome, thank you, and I really appreciate the invitation again, Ben. This was awesome. Really fun.
To everybody else who joined us today, thank you so much again for your comments, your questions, everything else, all the good dialogue. We will be sending out the recording, the slides, and a survey for you in the next week or so. So keep your eyes peeled for that on your email. Thank you again to everybody for joining us, and have a great day.